Right, we're now joined via video link by Professor Fareed Abdullah, South African Medical Research Council Director of AIDS and TB Office, to discuss this further. Thank you so much, Prof, for your time. So, simply put, what does pandemic prevention, preparedness and response entail exactly? And how urgent do you think it is as a key priority globally, especially post-COVID-19?
Thank you for having me. If we knew when the next pandemic will come, then we'd be able to plan for it and take our time about it if it was a decade away. The problem with the next pandemic is that it could happen any time, it could happen next week. And because of this recent horrendous experience that we and the whole world has had with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's become pretty urgent that we have a basic plan in place for the next time that a pandemic hits.
And I want to discuss just, what it would take to get us there. I mean, one of the biggest lessons from COVID-19 was the over-reliance, for instance, on foreign vaccine production. What would it take to make regional manufacturing hubs across Africa viable and sustainable, both scientifically, financially, and in fact, logistically too?
Well, all of that starts at tracking and looking for the next pathogen that will cause the next pandemic. And this is where low middle income countries have a distinct role and perhaps a distinct advantage, because we are tracking infections in animals that may spill over to humans. And if we can find humans who become ill from these new pathogens or kind of variants of the pathogens we know, then we have the capability in South Africa to sequence that, to look at their genetic sequencing. And that's the starting point for producing a vaccine. You have to understand the genetic sequence of a vaccine, of a pathogen, to produce a vaccine. But to answer your question, having had this incredible resource, which is important for us, but also for the world, how do we then put this into a situation where we can produce our own vaccines? The answer is that it will take a while, but we have to start now. And there are some really good signs. So, for instance, the Medical Research Council, working with the Department of Health, has developed the mRNA hub, which is based in Cape Town, which actually has the capability of producing its own COVID vaccine using mRNA technology. From there, it's about building it up. But the approach we're taking is not to do it alone, but to work with multiple centers and the Africa CDC to develop our own capability. And that, you've said, is where our self-reliance, will come from.
I want to talk about the working groups, the health working groups that have been taking place, given that it is a G20 and we have the presidency for the G20. But before that, the G20 countries have endorsed a pandemic agreement championed by the WHO. What can you tell us about the agreement in terms of what it hopes to solve, particularly for countries in the global south?
Well, I'm happy to have participated in those pandemic treaty negotiations on behalf of the Medical Research Council. And as you know, a South African, Professor Precious Matsoso, co-chaired that. It was a 3-year process to get 193 countries to agree to how to work together to manage the next pandemic. In that, there were some really difficult issues. The first is that the northern countries would like countries in the south to do good surveillance, to find new pathogens that may lead to a new pandemic, or what we call pathogens of pandemic potential. But, there's countries in the south who are saying that's fine that we do that, but then you have to share the vaccines, drugs, and therapeutics. So that was a really important sticking point and a basic approach to work together, both to share our information with the North, but also for the North to share its resources with the South has been a kind of agreed to in principle. In addition to that, There was a lot of talk about what you raised earlier, which is, do countries really have to rely on the North for vaccines? Shouldn't we be producing our own vaccines so that we don't have to stand at the end of the queue the next time there's a pandemic? And there was a good agreements about supporting local and regional production, technology transfer. But for the Medical Research Council, the most important thing is that we had some really good clauses for scientists in the North and the South to cooperate in a way which is ethical, which is collaborative, and which benefits everyone, and not just the global North.
And I want to talk about, Prof, two other things that we have been discussing earlier on, and that's on infrastructure as well as diagnostics. How close are we to having the kind of infrastructure and perhaps regulatory processes needed for the African continent to produce and distribute its own diagnostics, especially when you look at vaccines at scale?
So actually, during COVID, we were really good at producing our own diagnostics. That was not something which is sort of out of our capability. And in fact, at Wits University, they professors there developed many of the controls for the diagnostics that were used throughout the world for the COVID diagnostics. The key to a good diagnostic for a viral pathogen is to have the genetic sequence. And as you know, we have great infrastructure and capability for genetic sequencing and for the production of diagnostics. I think where we fall short is in our ability in the manufacturing sector. And there, two things come to play. One is we have to work with the private sector to convince our own private sector partners that they need to invest in manufacturing for diagnostics. And the second thing is that then government needs to give some assurances that government will buy those diagnostics and not go to India or China and buy cheaper diagnostics, where price always trumps everything else. We need to take a longer term view that if some market share can be guaranteed, and of course the prices have to be reasonably competitive, then that is a key ingredient to the long-term development of this industry.
Let's now talk about the proposal that was made, Prof, during the Fourth Health Working Group, one of the meetings that you've also been attending, for a commission on science and science for health and economic growth. I mean, what is the commission about in terms of that? And there are, of course, concerns that funding cuts could pose a threat to its success.
So this is such a good example. I'm glad you raised it, Paul, where South Africa sort of takes a very ethical view that the whole world should benefit from scientific developments in healthcare. If you look at our own country and if you look at healthcare generally, there is a wonderful explosion of new technology, digital health, the use of artificial intelligence, robotics, precision medicine, where each individual's gene sequences will determine what diagnostics will work better and what treatment will work better. I mean, I can go on with a long list of things, but what South Africa is proposing, and this is a prerogative of being the presidency of the G20, is that there should be a commission led by the World Health Organization with the involvement of G20 countries, where we can look at all of these scientific developments, make sure that they are ethically used, but more importantly, that they are not just available to the rich, the super rich in many cases, and that everyone in the world benefits from this huge explosion in medical technology that we're seeing unfolding before our eyes.
Prof, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Well, that's the end of our segment. That was Professor Fareed Abdullah, South African Medical Research Council Director of AIDS and TB, helping us just to unpack today's focus, really, which is on a matter that affects us all, which is the health and, of course, importantly, pandemic readiness, that speaks to a number of issues, as we've been speaking about, that speak to prevention, preparedness, as well as response, also known as the PPPR, will continue to focus on all the working groups that are currently being held under the G20 presidency of South Africa, leading up to that Leaders Summit taking place in November.